I'm grateful again to be with you, and we're going to talk today about spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity. I believe that we were born again when we trusted Christ as our Savior and Lord, and we were born to grow. My oldest son, Jeremy, when he was born, he was 9 pounds, 7 ounces, and I was so happy. I am a Rams fan, and I thought the Rams were going to come to give him a contract within a day or two. But I don't know if my wife was quite as happy as I was when he was that big. But nevertheless, he's 47 now. And if he was still weighing in at 9 pounds, it would be one of the biggest tragedies of my life. I see all kinds of Christians who are born again, but they're still weighing in at their born again body weight. And we need to grow. God calls us to grow. In the life of growth, while it may have its bumps and bruises and so on, it is a life that is good for us. It is a life that is fulfilling and so on. So I want to address my remarks to that, and I'll turn your attention first off to Ephesians 4:12. And it says there that the work of the pastor-teacher, who is supposed to be the mature one, the leader of a body of believers, the work of the pastor-teacher is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. I'll refer to that verse a couple of times during our talk. But basically, it is an embellishment on those verses I'd like to turn our attention. The work of the pastor-teacher is to equip the saints for the work of ministry. The Greek word there for equip is katartismos. It is used in many places in secular Greek at the time the New Testament was written, but primarily two. It was a medical term which meant to mend the broken bone. And it was a nautical term, rig the ship for full sail so it could go out of the harbor. To mend and to deploy, this is the mark of the mature person. So as we begin, let's pray. Father, I know I don't know very much. I know I have crumbs to offer, but you are in the business of taking crumbs and multiplying them and blessing them and distributing them so hungry hearts can leave satisfied. I pray for these students that you'd give them hungry hearts this morning. I pray that each one would receive something from the talk because you had engineered it going to their heart and speaking to particular felt need. For that to happen, we need your Holy Spirit to be at work in our midst. We don't have errors, Father. We don't make pretensions of thinking that one person could speak in a room full of people, each with unique challenges on his or her heart, and hope that something could be said that would speak to each heart unless you're involved in the transaction. So please, this morning, I pray, meet us, feed us, give us what we need. Open our eyes with a sense of hope that as we mature in you, you will not abandon us in the pains and difficulties, and that you will be equipping us to be menders and deployers. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. The social scientists talk about human development. You've got people like Piaget, who talks about cognitive development, the life of the mind. You've got Erik Erikson, who talks about psychosocial development. You also have people like Kohlberg and Gilligan. Gilligan was a student of Kohlberg's, and they talk about moral development. Kohlberg did all of his study, and he came out at the end by saying a morally developed person should have a strong and profound sense of justice. Gilligan was his student, and she says, I think your conclusions are all wrong. Can you imagine saying that to your doctoral supervisor? But he had enough honesty in him. He said, make your case. And she said, you did all your study with men. I think if you would have included women in the study, you might have come out with a little bit different conclusion. He said, okay, run the study. She did her study with men and women. You know what she found? A morally developed person has a sense of justice, but also a sense of nurture, You know how to encourage and nurture people to learn to live a just life. It's very good. There was also Fowler and Perry, and they wrote about spiritual development. But the social scientists did not invent human development. Throughout history, people have been talking about these things. In popular culture, what do we talk about? You finish the line. The terrible twos, yeah. Are the twos terrible? No. It's just that when you give birth to a child and you need to go to the bathroom, you put the child on the blanket and the child's just going to lay there till you come back. But then all of a sudden when the child gets about 2 and they've got legs that motor, you put the child down on the blanket and then you come back and you find the child's down the street someplace. It's not terrible twos. Those are natural part of the development. They are inconvenient twos, is what we should call them. Then we also have adolescence. We have midlife crises. I remember when I hit midlife, I'd taken a course in grad school on midlife crisis, and when I hit midlife, I was looking everywhere for those notes, And then you have old age. That's an interesting time. I have to remember what was it my parents said about what they were going through at that time? We go through these phases. Shakespeare writes about it too. In his play All's Well That Ends Well, one of the characters named Jacques, he says, all the world's a stage, and all the people are players, and each one plays 8 parts in their life. I don't remember all the 8, but let me just remember the child mewling and puking. Have you ever held a child that's just a newborn, and all new mothers, they have puke all over their clothes, as best they can do. Mewling and puking. You've got the schoolboy. You've got the person who falls in love. You've got the soldier. You've got the judge. You've got the slippered pantaloon. And then you've got second childhood, the senior citizen. And he says, sans teeth, sans hair, sans whatever. They're just losing it. But there are phases that Shakespeare even identified. But Scripture does this as well. We're born again, but we're born to grow. 1 Corinthians 13, when I was a child, I thought as a child, I reasoned as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. There's development. 1 John 2, 12 through 14, I'm writing to you children, Greek word, teknia, a child who's just a toddler. Later he says, I have written to you children, and he uses a different word, paideia. It's a child of teachable age. Then he says, I'm writing to you young men, or you adolescents. What? Because the word of God abides in you, and you become strong, and you know how to resist the evil one. In other words, they're matured, so they not only have the scriptures, but they know how those scriptures are useful in their own development as they go through the temptations and struggles of life. And then he says, I've written to you fathers, because you know the one who's been from the beginning. There's maturation. It even says it about Jesus, Luke 2:52. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and favor with God and man. Wisdom, there was intellectual development that applied to application, which led to wisdom. Grew in wisdom and stature, physical development. And in favor with God, spiritual development. In favor with man, I think they could have also said emotional development, psychological development. But he went through those phases, unlike us. He went through them without sin. He was the perfect person and so on. But nevertheless, he still had to go through those phases. Spiritual development and maturity is important. And Dawson Trotman, do you guys know that name? If you go to what are the big buildings that up beyond Whispering Pines where people can stay? Yeah. If you go up to those buildings, there's pictures of Dawson Trotman there. He actually spoke at Hume Lake in the 50s. He was the founder of a ministry called the Navigators. Have you heard of it? Similar to Campus Crusade or InterVarsity or something like that. And Dawson Trotman preached a sermon called Born to Reproduce. And he made an observation. A mature person, a mark of maturity, is that if they're physiologically mature, they could reproduce physiologically. If they're spiritually mature, he then says they must be able to reproduce spiritually, lead a person to Christ, nurture that person so that person could go lead other people to Christ. And I was impressed when I read that sermon, and I've been impressed with Dawson Trotman as I've read about him over the years. And there was a man named David Morkin. He was a grandfather of one of my students at Wheaton. And he used to go around the country preaching with Dawson Trotman. My student said, would you like to have lunch with my grandfather? I said, wild horses won't keep me away. And over lunch, I said, you knew him firsthand. Tell me Trotman stories. He says, well, there's this one I love to tell. And it's when we were preaching at a church, it was either in Portland or Seattle, one of the big cities in the Pacific Northwest. And he said the pastor of the church was a guy Trotman had led to Christ and discipled. The pastor introduced Trotman that way before he preached. Trotman gets in the pulpit and he says, it's true, I had the privilege of leading your pastor to Christ and discipling him. That's why I'm not afraid to do what I'm going to do right now. He calls the pastor back to his side, unrehearsed. He said, point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. Can you imagine? He points to Steve in the back. He said, Steve Trotman, in the service, it's a formal time. You know, in the 50s, things were more formal. It's a big church. He said, Steve, stand up. Point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. Steve points over to Matthew. Matthew, stand up. Point me to somebody in this church you led to Christ and discipled. He points to Lydia. Lydia, stand up. Point me to somebody in this congregation you led to Christ and discipled. Can you imagine it? It went like that for 7 generations. And Trotman was confident it would go like that when he asked the pastor back to his side, because he discipled the pastor. When I heard that story, I just said, that's incredible. There's the tragedy. The normative has become the incredible. How do we get it back to the normative again? And there's a lack of spiritual maturity because we're not growing in a place where we learn how to mend the broken and deploy them into useful ministry and service. Equip the saints for the work of ministry. So as we think about this, I would say the maturing process is contextualized in relationship with others, relationship with God, and relationship with man. The great commandment is that we would love God with all our soul, our strength, our mind, and that we would love our neighbor as ourself. Pascal said that Christians have 2 laws better than all the laws of statecraft. Love God and love your neighbor. It's an ontological reality. Ontos is the Greek word that means being. It comes from the Greek verb eimi, which is I am. So if you have this participle form, it just means being. And the ontological reality is rooted in God and our being made in His image. He wants to make us like His Son. And His Son is one of the persons in the Trinity. It's a relational feature. Relational attributes and a non-contingent being presuppose that relationship is necessary in that being. We'll talk more about it when we get to Mere Christianity today, about the 3-personal God. But just simply say, maturation then should be moving me towards a more robust understanding of relational experiences. So we've got a problem, and the problem is sin. What is sin? How would you define it? Yes? It does separate us from God. That's a factor. What is it that prompts that factor? Yeah, in other words, that's the result of our sin. It separates us. It estranges us, not only from God, but from one another, and even from ourselves, I think, in some way. Yeah?
It's just like it's an action that kind of shows that you are focused on another God. You're like, it's always about idolship.
Always what?
About idolship.
Idolship. It has that characteristic too. I think these are true. But what is it that's at the core? What is it that prompts sin? Say it again. A perversion? Okay, I think those are, again, characteristics of them. If you were going to talk about, the mountains and so on, we could see characteristics. They have trees, they have stone, they have hills and all that stuff. Characteristics, but what's at the core of this? Okay, we're going to go ahead. Huh? Our flesh? Is our flesh inherently bad? God made it. Jesus came in it. We're going to be raised with it. Can't be inherently bad. What do you got?
The disobedience of God.
Disobedience, I think, is another factor that's important. But what is it? What is it that causes us to move towards disobedience, causes us to move towards these estrangements and so on? Yes? Pride is a factor. Pride is a factor, and that's getting closer, I think.
Anything that's not under the will of God.
We're kind of like inventing it up as we go along ourselves. I think you're closer. Go ahead. What do you got, Beth?
Wanting to be God ourselves.
Huh?
Wanting to be God ourselves.
I think that's it. Were you going to say that?
I was going to say missing the mark.
Say it again.
Missing the mark of what God intended.
Well, missing the mark is good. These are the ideas. The Greek word for sin is hamartia. It was an archer's term. The doctrine of sin, if you study theology, is called hamartiology. So the archer takes the arrow from his quiver, knocks it in the bow, shoots it at the target, and misses the mark. But what's the mark we missed? Romans 3:23, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Sin basically is man playing God of his own life. And interestingly enough, you've got that in virtually every definition of sin in Scripture. In 1 John 3:4, it says, sin is lawlessness. But the Greek word there for lawlessness is not antinomian. Nomos is a Greek word for law. It's not against God's law. It's anomos. It's without God's law. We'll be a law to ourselves. It's anarchistic. It's man playing God of his own life. In Genesis 3, Satan says to Adam and Eve, in the day you eat of this tree, you will be what? Like God. You're going to assume this. In Satan's fall, Ezekiel 28 and Isaiah 14, I will be like the Most High. Sin is in essence man playing God of his own life. And the consequences are all these other things you've talked about. It's very perceptive of you that you saw these characteristics. But if I'm playing God of my own life, the sins that I commit are a consequence of my mismanagement. I'm not God. And consequently, then sin estranges me not only from God, but it estranges me from others. If you're playing God of your life and I'm playing God of my life, we're a bunch of anarchists. Anarchists make bad community people. And so consequently, as a result of this, there are all kinds of problems. We're gonna talk more about this too later this afternoon. But that's the characteristic of sin. And if spiritual maturity means that I would be disposed towards your benefit, right? Equip the saints for the work of ministry. I'm actually divorced from that responsibility. And I need to mature and I need to get better so I could do this properly. It was Owen Barfield, who was a friend of C.S. Lewis's. He made this statement, and he uses a phrase from the Latin, sine qua non. Sine qua non. It basically means without which there is nothing. And he said this, the experience of oneself over against that which is not oneself is a sine qua non of human consciousness. If I'm not aware of my responsibility to others, I get to the place where I am so divorced that I can't actually mature and become what I ought to be. My best friend at Wheaton College is the theater professor. Where's Sydney? Yeah, there you go. You're a theater person. He is the theater professor. He was an actor on Broadway. He had been. He's a Shakespearean. He used to be in the soap operas all the time for many years before he left to come teach at Wheaton. He is a great guy. He was raised in a missionary family. He was born in Argentina. He's the last born child in a big, huge family. And his father, I knew his father. He was a good man, but he was a little bit on the rigid side of evangelicalism, more leaning towards the fundamentalist side. Mark was an artist. His dad had no categories for art. And Mark wanted to show his parents how much he loved them when he was little. So they were gone one day, and one of the older siblings was supposed to be watching them. You know how that goes. And so he got out his colored pencils, his felt tip markers, and his paints, and he spent the whole day painting a picture up the back white wall of their house. And the whole time he's doing this, he's saying, Dad and Mom are going to see this, and they're going to know I love them. And they're going to bring the neighbors in and say, look how much Mark loves us. Look what he did. Well, when his parents came home, it didn't quite go that way. And he got spanked. And he said, you know, I was trying to show them I love them, and they didn't get it. I don't know about you, but which of us, if we had a child do that, we would have enough perceptivity to say, wow, Mark, that's amazing. Tell us about it. What were you thinking when you did that? Oh, you wanted to show us how much you loved us. Well, you know what? We're not going to be able to keep it all, but tomorrow we're going to go to a frame shop. And we're going to buy a frame, and we're going to put it on the part of that you like the most. And we're going to really celebrate this. Which of us would do that? Many years later, Mark was directing the autumn play. And he was getting up early in the morning, helping his wife get the kids ready for school, stuff like this. He was going to the office. He was giving lectures, preparing lectures. He was meeting with students in office hours. He was grading papers. He was going to faculty governance meetings. He'd come home for a 1 hour break, and then he'd go back in the evening for rehearsals that went long into the night. After about 3 weeks of this, he was pretty weary. And he comes home for that 1 hour break, and his daughter Ruby is standing on a chair at the sink with a plastic basin, filling it with water splashing everywhere, making a complete mess. And he's thinking, I got to clean this stuff up. I'm just tired. Ruby, honey, what are you doing? And Mark's wife, Mary, said, Mark, she knew you were weary. She was just putting water in a basin so she could wash your feet. And Mark immediately remembers his own experience. He says, oh, Ruby, honey, I am so sorry. Let me help you with that. He said it was the coldest water he ever put his feet in his life. But he said, you know, my folks didn't get it right. I got it half right. Maybe one day Ruby will get it all right. What is it about that story that touches us so deeply? Because we've all been the one who was hurt like that. Our well-intentions was misunderstood. We've also all been the one who misunderstood the well-intentions of others. And we're in this situation. How many of you know the book Blue Like Jazz by Donald Miller? It's crazy to me because that book was like the rage, 15 years ago. Everybody was reading it. Now nobody's heard of it. That's how it is with our popular books, you know. The New York Times bestseller list, 5 years later, nobody knows about it. But he wrote a sequel to it called Searching for God Knows What. And in the sequel, he talked about how when he was in high school, he longed to be in the popular group at his school. And he was always on the outside perimeter. And he wanted to break in. One day he was at home and he read a poem. And he liked the poem, so he memorized it. A couple weeks later, somebody in the group said something. He goes, oh, that reminds me of a poem. And he said it by memory. And all the other kids said, Miller, you are smart. You are so smart. He said two things happened. Number one, it was the first time in his life he ever felt good about himself. So he started memorizing more poetry after that. And second, he realized he needed to gain a sense of himself based on what other people thought of him, but everybody he looked to was as insecure as he was. There's only one person who can give you a proper sense of self, and that's the God who loves you, the God who invited you by virtue of his grace to be born again, and the God who will not abandon you in the process of spiritual maturity. So that becomes important to us. I want to talk about two analogies that I think depict this fairly well. The first one I'm going to call scratched records. Do you guys know what a record player is? All right, because sometimes I have to make sure because things have changed a little bit. So anyway, the record player, you'd take a disc, right? A vinyl disc with grooves in it, and you'd put it on the record player, and you put the needle in the grooves, and it would begin to play. And our lives are like that. Somebody put the record of our life on the record player of life, and we begin to play out our themes. But invariably, in a very broken world, those records would get scratched. And when they got scratched, what would they do? Huh? They would go round, go round, go round, go round. They'd skip, they'd get in that groove and go back to that last groove. They'd get in that scratch and go back to the last groove. I think all of us have 3 to 5 pretty deep scratches in our record. And consequently, we get stuck in that place. And the social scientists say, when this sort of thing happens, we start looking for surrogates with whom we could play out the themes of those scratches and try to move beyond it. You know, and when I say surrogates, you're driving down the road, you cut somebody off accidentally and somebody honks at you, and then you get mad at that person, so you get behind them, and 20 miles down the road, you're still honking the horn at them, screaming obscenities at them or something like that. It's not about them cutting you off. They woke something in you that was yet broken and wanted to be mended. You go to work, they hire somebody new at work. You don't know this person, but you don't like them. Somebody says, why don't you like them? You hardly know them. And what do we say? Bad chemistry. Have you ever heard that phrase before? Bad chemistry. It was just bad chemistry between us. We don't get along. I don't know what it is. It's probably because they somehow have some characteristic that reminds you of the person who scratched your record. You see it in marriages a lot of times. You're going to marry somebody, you're getting along fine, but then some little tiff occurs, and then you say, and by the way, there's also that other thing. And we always bring in that other thing. What is that other thing? Some place where, because I'm close to this person, my garbage awakens at some characteristic of their life, and I project it on them. That's a surrogate. The result of these scratches in our record, somewhat painful, and so we also gravitate towards what I call anesthetizing behaviors. Anesthetizing behaviors. These behaviors don't get us better. They just temporarily get us by. There's obvious anesthetizing behaviors: alcoholism, drug addiction, sexual addiction, eating disorders. You can have workaholism, could be one. Something where you occupy yourself with this time because temporarily it deadens a pain that's going on inside of you. There's the less obvious ones. I haven't worked with that many Hell's Angel biker type guys, but I've worked with enough of them to see a pattern within them. Guess what? Beneath that hard veneer was a marshmallow heart. They'd been hurt enough that they decided to put up this wall so they could monitor what might get to that heart. I know a guy, he creates chaos in his world, so everybody's attention will be directed towards that chaos because he doesn't want anybody to notice the chaos in his own life, and yet it's just there, obvious. And as we grow older, we pick up convictions, and our convictions seem to run against the grain of these anesthetizing behaviors. And yet we find we're still going back to those behaviors. Why is that? My theory is that our wounds are deeper than our convictions. Our wounds are deeper than our convictions. We just want things to get better. So how do they get better? How can we get better given the sadnesses that we have in a broken and fallen world where we pick up these characteristics and behaviors? And I know of a situation where I think it's a good, this one situation, it's a real story, a person's real life story. I know of a situation where this guy got better. And I want to share it with you because I think that we can draw from his story characteristics of the maturing life. This is a true story. It's a boy, he's raised in a large family. And he's one of the youngest kids in the family. And somehow he gets the brunt of the grunt. He's abused terribly. He's physically abused, emotionally abused. I don't think he was sexually abused, but terribly abused in his family. And I mean, his story is so sad. It's not my story, but it's one I'm very familiar with. Terribly abused. And so finally, when he's 17 years old, he's kicked out of the family. No visible means of support, has to make it on his own completely. He finds work, and he is clever. And he climbs the ladder at his place of work, and when he gets as high as he can get, given his limited circumstances, somebody at work filed a sexual harassment charge against him. I am absolutely convinced the guy was innocent, but he went to prison for 7 years for this. Remember I told you about my college roommate who murdered his wife? He only went to prison for 3 years. This guy, I'm confident, is innocent, but he goes to prison 7 years. He's got a lot of scratches in his record, doesn't he? Can he get better? He does. And how he got better, I think, is instructive for us. And you know whose story I told you? You all know it. That was Joseph's story. Joseph in the Bible. He's raised in a large family. And he's abused by his brothers. Why did his brothers abuse him? Huh? Why? Because he was a favorite. And if anybody should have known better to prefer one son over his other sons, should have been Jacob, who was the young son of his father Isaac, who preferred Esau over him. And then there's some ambiguity even with Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael. The sins of the parents are visited on the children of the third and fourth generation. Scriptures say it's clear. These scratches are coming from every angle. And the other thing too, third and fourth generation. Does anybody know the first names of their 8 great-grandparents? You don't know their names, but you're living in the shadow of people whose names you don't even know. Not only that, you're casting a shadow for people who won't know your name. It's important that we mature and mend in these areas because of the influence we're going to have, negative or positive. But by the way, it also says, don't lose hope. It says that the good of people are projected to the 1,000th generation. So you've got beneficiaries as well. You're the beneficiary of things as well. But anyway, here's Jacob, who's doing what he didn't like in his own family, and he's creating havoc at that level. I think that they were really mad at their father, but Joseph was the easier target. And have you ever heard of black sheep in families? You know, I was the black sheep of my family or something. They probably weren't. They probably had projected on them things in their family and so on. It's sad. It's just a sadness. And that's why we need people to mature who could be menders and healers and so on. Well, anyway, he is sold to the Ishmaelites. He ends up in Egypt. He's sold to Potiphar. And the consequence of that is Potiphar's wife comes on. He's really clever. He moves up the ladder. Potiphar puts him in charge of everything in his house. And then Potiphar's wife comes on to him. This young man, horny as probably all get out, but no hope of any prospect of marriage or anything like that. And he is strong in character. He resists her overtures. So she's the one who files a sexual harassment charge, and he goes to prison. How does he get better? Do you guys know about Cliff Notes? You know about Sparks Notes? Okay, so the Sparks Notes edition would be this. When he's elevated second only to Pharaoh in Egypt, and he's restored, he has 2 kids. He's given the priest's daughter for a wife. He has 2 children. Know the names of them? The first child's name was Manasseh. Does anybody know what Manasseh means? Is there anybody in here who ever knew what Manasseh meant?
Is it God?
Huh?
Is it God remembers or God saves?
You're moving along the right line, but you used to know.
I knew it.
You used to know. And what happened?
I forgot.
That's what it means. I forgot. I knew we could draw it out of you. Manasseh means I forget. And he said, for the Lord made it possible for me to forget what happened in my father's house. He wasn't stuffing it. It wasn't that he didn't remember. When the brothers come to get grain, he gives them a banquet and he seats them in chronological order of their birth. He remembers details. Not only that, when they come, 10 brothers come to get grain. They leave Benjamin back home. What does Joseph ask them? Do you have any other brothers? If 10 people came to you and they were all brothers, was that the first question you'd ask? Do you have any more? No. Why is he asking that question? Because he remembered he had a younger brother, Benjamin, and he's probably thinking, did you sell him off too? Do I need to go try to find him and redeem him? He knows details. What does he mean? I forget. And I think it meant that he was able to process forgiveness to the place where it didn't hold him anymore. You have pain in your life, some area, and you got a long drive ahead of you, a couple hours maybe. You go in the car and our minds will gravitate towards unresolved pain. You start thinking about those things again. You want to turn on the radio or put in a CD or something like that. Anesthetize with sound. So you don't have to go there. No, sit with it. Re-enter that dark room. And as you think about it, grieve. Say, God, give me grace to forgive. And maybe it takes a 2-hour drive before you finally bring it to the Manasseh place. A couple weeks later, you got another drive. Takes maybe another 2 hours to get it to that place. A couple weeks later, 2 hours again. A couple weeks later, 2 hours again. A couple weeks later, an hour and 45 minutes. A couple weeks later, an hour and 30 minutes. A couple weeks later, an hour and 15 minutes. A couple weeks later, 3 hours. You had a relapse. But you stay with it. And eventually there comes a day when the memory and the forgiveness become one act. And at that moment, Manasseh's born. You're not coming from that place anymore. The second son's name is what? Ephraim. And what does Ephraim mean? How'd you get that? Yeah, there you go. That's good. Well done. I'm impressed. Ephraim means be fruitful. Get on with the fruitful purposes that God has for you. And by the way, having passed through the Manasseh experience, that becomes useful data for you to engage in the Ephraim experience. He wants us to be people who can equip the saints. He wants us to be able to help people mend and be deployed. That means if I'm familiar with my own stuff, I will be more empathetic towards the person he's calling me to mend. And I will be able to encourage them, which means I know that whatever they're going through, it's not a last word description of what their life is. God is in the recycle business. I don't know about you, but if I was God, and aren't you glad I'm not, I wouldn't have had Joseph prepare to be the prime minister of Egypt by sending them to prison for 7 years and going through all these horrible experiences and being a slave. But you know, when he was in prison, if you'll remember, the prison guard puts him in charge of all the other prisoners. The other prisoners were incorrigible people, and somehow he brings order out of the chaos. What kinds of leadership gifts did he build in that painful situation? It's really incredible to me. Okay, so there's the Joseph situation. By the way, years ago I had a woman, a student of mine, and she came into my office. I didn't have office hours, but she just burst in the doors. And she said, Jerry, I was at chapel this morning, and a woman named Carol Anderson was speaking, and all my life I have struggled. I have struggled with my sense of self. And all my life I've struggled with this stuff. And she said something today that helped me realize that I could be whole. And I'm just overwhelmed that God gave me grace. And I said, well, you've struggled with this all your life. That's kind of cool. You came to this realization. We need to worship Jesus. Let's pray. So we prayed. We thanked God for what she had learned. And then afterwards I said, you said you've struggled with this all your life. What was that about? And I looked at the clock when I asked her that question. For 20 minutes, she went on. And I remember saying to her, she said, well, I suppose you think it was my parents. I said, I don't know if it's your parents or not. I'm asking the question because I don't know. Well, my sister thinks it's my parents. I didn't ask you anything about your parents, but twice you've defended your parents in front of me. That seems to indicate maybe there's something raw there. And she went for 20 minutes getting angrier and angrier. She was raised in a missionary home. Her father ruled by control. If you did something he didn't like, he wouldn't even pay attention to you. She said I could walk into a room, and if he was mad at me, he would just look past me and wouldn't even acknowledge me. If I asked him a question, he wouldn't respond to me until I somehow came into the realm of doing what he wanted. 3 weeks, she said, one time he never spoke a word to her in the home. A young girl who wants some attention from her father. It's a sad story. And she said at the end, I don't think I'll ever be able to love my parents. I said, that's not an option available to you. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, you came in here a few minutes ago and told me that you learned that God loved you not based on your performance, and now you tell me you're going to withhold love to your parents based on their performance. The mark that you're getting better is that you're learning to love better than maybe you received. And that's spiritual formation. You've been born again, but you're born to grow. Okay, so that's the first analogy. The second analogy, I like to call it the 3 rooms. And all of us have to pass through 3 rooms, I think. If there's 3, there might be 303, but for the sake of the analogy, we'll limit it to these 3. The first room I call the Goodwill Hunting room. Did any of you ever see that movie? Okay, so Goodwill Hunting, it's the only movie Robin Williams won an Academy Award for. And the main characters are Matt Damon, and you've got Ben Affleck. They wrote that movie in their 20s. They wrote the screen. And you're going, how did they have this insight? Now, the movie, it's hard to recommend because the language is so foul. But it's not gratuitous. When you have Bad News Bears and you have 9-year-old girls talking like drunken sailors, that's gratuitous. But this is about a bunch of guys who grew up in South Boston and rough and tumble area. I think they probably did talk like that. The movie starts out where there's this professor, and he's a very arrogant professor. He's won the Fields Medal. It's better than the Nobel Prize. He's won the Fields Medal for mathematics. They give it out only every 3 years, and he's pretty stuck on himself. And he says to these students in his class, I put a problem on the board out in the hall back there. If anybody can solve that before the semester's over, I'll get you a job making 6 figures before, right after graduation. He says, but I don't think anybody's going to be able to solve it. The students come to class the next day, and the problem's solved. The professor says, okay, who did this? He knows he's got genius in his midst somewhere. Who solved the problem? Nobody owns it. So he puts another problem on the board, and they come to class the next day, and he says, okay, smarty pants, whoever you are, see if you could solve this one. That problem out there took me 2 years to solve, and I'm the Fields Medal winner. They come to class the next day, problem solved. He knows now he's in the presence of Einstein-level genius. He's trying to find out. He puts another problem out there. That night, he's working late with his TA, and they come out in the hall, and the custodian at MIT is messing with the board, and the custodian at MIT is the one who answers the problem. They go chasing after him. Hey, where are you going? He disappears. They come back to the board, and they say, it's right. So they go to the custodial office the next day because they want to find this guy. But he's been arrested because he violated his probation. He was raised in the foster system. He was abandoned by his parents. He's been treated horribly. And he's an angry person. And he hasn't resolved the anger that burns inside of him. But he also can't let go of his curiosity and his genius. And he has a photographic memory and he reads books and so on. And so the professor goes to the courts and says, release him to me. They say, we'll release him to you on one condition. You find a psychologist who will work with him. So here's the professor who says, I want to use him. This kid knows what it's like for people who want to use him. He's been used and abused all of his life. So he releases him, but he's got to find a psychologist. So he takes him to a Harvard psychologist. And Will Hunting reads all of his books one night, has them memorized. He goes in to meet with this guy, and he ties him in knots. And the guy says to the professor, I don't want anything to do with him. Takes him to an MIT psychologist, same thing. Takes him to all these psychologists. Nobody will take him because he's smarter than they are. He's only got one last hope. His old college roommate, Sean, played by Robin Williams. The professor doesn't have high regard for Sean because Sean didn't make a name for himself. He decided to go back to the old neighborhood, and though he has a Harvard degree, he decided to teach at the community college and to reach out to kids that were in the same world that he grew up in. And so the first we see Robin Williams in the movie, the professor comes to the door of the classroom, and we see Robin Williams saying, the most important thing a therapist can do with his client is cultivate trust in the relationship. And just then the professor breaks in the middle of the class, because he's very important, you see, more important than the class. Robin Williams says, oh, students, we've got the presence of the Fields Medal winner. They were roommates in college, these two. The class has to be dismissed. The professor's got important stuff to do. He says, I've got a kid. He's a genius. And he's troubled. The court's released him to my care if I can find a psychologist who will work with him. Robin Williams teaches psychology, but he has a private practice on the side. And he said, who did you take him to before you brought him to me? Where was I on your list? You didn't take him to that guy at Harvard, did you? Oh, come on. You didn't take him to that guy at MIT, did you? Come on. He's not the movie's not trashing psychologists and all that stuff, but it's trashing pretense. So Robin Williams says, I'll see him. Professor brings him. And then the professor pulls up a chair and sits down like he's going to watch the therapy. And Robin Williams says, you get out of here. And he goes out, and sure enough, Matt Damon, Will Hunting, he ties Robin Williams in knots like he did with everybody else. And Robin Williams has him by the throat up against the wall. And Matt Damon says, I think the therapy session's over. He says to the professor, I'll see him. I'll see him next week. Have him here on time. Next week, Will Hunting comes to the office. Robin Williams says, come on, let's go for a walk. And they walk to Boston Gardens. Did you guys ever read Make Way for Ducklings when you were kids? So that's where that all takes place. If you go there, they have the ducklings, bronze ducklings and all that stuff. And so they're sitting on a bench. The swan boats are lazily passing by. There's swans in the pond and whatnot. And Robin Williams says to him, I thought about you a lot last week. I thought about you till way late into the night. And I haven't thought about you much since. He said, you are really smart, but you've gotten so much of what you know from books. You read about war. Robin Williams had been a Vietnam vet. You read about war, but you don't know what it's like to have your best friend with his head cradled in your lap as he bleeds to death from battle wounds. You've read about art, but you don't know what it's like to see the vibrancy of those colors on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel and smell what it's like to be in that room. You've read about love. Maybe you've been late a time or two, but you don't know what it's like to have the love of your life dying of cancer And you won't leave her bedside, even though the signs say visiting hours are over, and the nurses and doctors know that you're not going to go if you don't abide by what the sign says. Then Robin Williams says to him, "You're an orphan, aren't you?" Matt Damon kind of hangs his head. And he said, "What would you think if I told you, oh, I know all about that. I read Oliver Twist once." He says, "I want to know you, and I can't get to know you from a book. And I'm all in." Next week he comes for his counseling appointment. He doesn't say a thing the whole time. Will Hunting doesn't say a thing. Professor comes and says, "Did you fix him yet?" 3 times, that should have been enough. And Robin Williams says, "He didn't say a thing the whole time." And the professor says, "Is that good?" Robin Williams says, "Pretty impressive, actually. What was the deal? If Matt Damon doesn't give him what he wants, are you going to reject me like everybody else has rejected me in my life? Or are you going to hang in there with me?" And when Will Hunting sees he's willing to hang in there with him, then all of a sudden, some changes start to happen. And most of the movie, there's other themes in there too, the Minnie Driver situation and stuff like that. There's a lot of themes. The theme between Will Hunting and his best friend and so on. A lot of themes, but the main theme is what goes on with Will Hunting and the psychologist. And finally, after time, because it takes time to process the Manasseh experiences, after time, Robin Williams brings in his file, Matt Damon's file, and lays it out. And there are pictures of places where people burned cigarette butts, scars in his arms, stabbed him, beat him, horrible things. And Will Hunting says, "Do you know about this?" Robin Williams says, "Yeah, I do." He says, "No. I mean, do you know about this? Not just from my file, but do you know about this sort of thing?" And Robin Williams says, "Yeah, I do." And they talk about the abuses that they've both experienced. And what does Robin Williams say at that moment? It's the most important line in the entire movie. And those of you that saw it know what?
It's not your fault.
It's not your fault. And isn't it amazing how that sticks with us as we see that? He says, "This is not your fault." And Matt Damon, he just says, "Yeah, I know. He laughs it off, deflects it. He's not letting it sink in. And so he says it a second time. "This isn't your fault. I know. We're cool. I know." He says, "It's not your fault." He says, "Stop messing with me, man." And the soul cyst is lanced, and the pus begins to come out. And he falls in Robin Williams' arms. Every one of us has to come to the Good Will Hunting room where you find out the abuse of generational sin is not your fault. You got to get through that room. But if you leave the process at that point, you are a danger to yourself and the rest of the world. And the reason why is this. Luke 6:40 says that the pupil fully trained will be like his teacher. Doesn't mean we necessarily know what the teacher knows, but we pick up by contagion the qualities and characteristics of the teacher. And if you've been wounded in this life and you take off after you discover those wounds are not your fault, you will go and be a wounder of other people. Richard Rohr said, "Pain not transformed is transferred." And the next room that you have to go into is a very, very dark room. You have to begin to discover, as you learn to know yourself, who are the people you've maybe hurt along the way. Who was it that asked me the other day if you have regrets? Yeah, you were the one that asked me. And I mentioned to you, yeah, I have regrets about some of the harsh treatment of my kids. When I was a kid, my mom used to wipe poop in my face. And there were troubles. My sister came with me to some therapy sessions, and she's talking about what happened in our house. And she starts weeping, and she says that I got 10 times what any of the other kids got. And she's weeping. And I'm looking at her. And I said, Kathy, why are you weeping? She says, because I lived in that house and I couldn't do anything about it. Well, anyway, I'm not thinking about why is my mother doing this. I'm thinking I must be a really messed up person. And so we go through therapy, and I remember the day in therapy where the therapist said, this isn't your fault. Well, that's well and good. But then I have to start asking, where was it my fault? And what did I ever do to my children? I never wiped poop in their face. But there were times in some areas I was overbearing. And one I was most overbearing with is my oldest son. He has 170 IQ. You know how hard it is to raise a child who's so much smarter than you? But he would do idiosyncratic things. And it would make me sad. I didn't care if his grades weren't so good. My grades weren't so good. I didn't care if his beds weren't made in the morning. My beds sometimes weren't made. But I would get upset if he would do something idiosyncratic and I would see his friends making fun of him. He would lick his lips. I'd get him chapstick. He'd lose a chapstick, keep licking his lips, and he had one of those scabs all around his lips. Have you ever seen those? I would drop him off at school and I'd see the other kids pointing at him, laughing at him. And then they'd go running off and my son would just go shuffling to class by himself. And it just broke my heart. I'd say, Jeremy, I don't want you to do that anymore. And I would spank him. And he would do it again. And I'd spank him. And he'd do it again. And I think it was such severe spanking, I think it was child abuse. I think I did to him the things I hated having done to me. And you are at risk of that if you don't deal with the dark room. And the dark room's where we have to evaluate, are we passing on to others what we received ourselves? How do you get out of the dark room? I think there's only one way. You have to go and set it right with the people you hurt. You have to go and ask their forgiveness. And in the process of asking their forgiveness, what often happens is you say to yourself, you would never say it to them, but you say to yourself, oh, if you only knew, given the tools I was given, I'm doing the best I know how. If you say that to them, I'm doing the best I know how, you're making excuses for your acts. You don't want to make excuses. You want to own your dysfunction. But you know in your own mind you were doing the best you knew how. And what does that tell you? If you're a thoughtful person, what does that tell you? The person, yeah, go ahead. A little louder. That's true. I think we should always live there, right? John 15:5. Apart from me, you can do nothing, Jesus says. That's always a good thing. We need resources. But I think it means this. If you say to yourself, I was doing the best I knew how, that means the person who abused you was probably doing the best they knew how too. They had garbage in their life. And all of a sudden, empathy awakens in your heart for the person who hurt you. Forgiveness is accelerated towards that person. And you begin to understand in a broken world, we've all got enough burdens that we're carrying. And God wants you to equip the saints. Mend the broken. Not only your own brokenness, and not only those that you might have hurt, but even maybe be a mender of the person who hurt you. So I started asking my mom questions. And I found out horrible abuse that she endured. You know what I think about my mother now? She was a hero because she filtered out so much garbage that I didn't get. I got plenty of garbage, but she filtered out plenty. And all of a sudden I began to see her in a different light. And I began to find the process of forgiving was easier. That's the dark room. You've got to go through that. If you go through the Goodwill Hunting room and think you're done, you're a danger to yourself and the world because you're going to play the victim card all the time. You're going to think you have an excuse for everything that you endure, and that's false. It's delusional. It's not moving you towards themes of grace that should be overwhelming. Third room. Third room is a light room. When you realize that the person who hurt you was probably a person who was also hurt, and you begin to forgive them and care for them, that moves you to the light room, which is a room full of healing. It is the wounded healer room. And that's where you become the mature Christian who can equip saints for the work of ministry by mending the broken and deploying and so on. I want to end with reading you a quote. This is from Frederick Buechner. Do any of you know Frederick Buechner's writings? I would say probably second to Lewis. He is my favorite author. And I could tell you several things about him, but I'd love to contextualize it, but I don't have time. But he wrote this: if God speaks to us at all, other than through such channels as the Bible and the church, then I think he speaks to us largely through what happens to us. Because the word that God speaks to us is always an incarnate word, a word that takes on flesh in our world, in our own experience. A word spelled out to us not alphabetically in syllables, but enigmatically, in events, even in the books we read and the movies we see. The chances are we'll never get it just right. We're so used to hearing what we want to hear and remaining deaf to what it would be well for us to hear that it is hard to break the habit. But if we keep our hearts and minds open as well as our ears, if we listen with patience and hope, if we remember it all deeply and honestly, then I think we come to recognize beyond all doubt that however faintly we may hear him, he is indeed speaking to us. And that however little we may understand of it, his word to each of us is both recoverable and precious beyond telling. He goes, there's no event so commonplace, but that God is present within it. The sorrows you've endured and so on. God is present within it, always hiddenly, always leaving you room to recognize him or not recognize him, but all the more fascinatingly because of that, all the more compellingly and hauntingly. If I were called upon to state in a few words the essence of everything I was writing, to say both as a novelist and as a preacher, it would be something like this: listen to your life. Listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery it is, in the boredom and pain of it, no less than in the excitement and gladness. Touch, taste, smell your way to the holy and hidden heart of it, because in the last analysis, all moments are key moments. Life is grace. God not only came, as we sang about this morning, 2,000 years ago, he's coming to every place in your life where the stresses and struggles have been. You know why? Because he loves you. He loves you. He loves you. And he wants to bring glory out of all those experiences. Any questions? Yes, sir.
What was the name of the author?
Say it again.
What was the name of the author you just quoted?
Frederick Buechner. Buechner. He came and taught one quad at Wheaton College. I got to know him a little bit. I had him autograph one of his books for my wife. And he said, "What's her name?" I said, "Claudia." He said, "Well, what's your name?" I said, "Jerry." He goes, "Our best friends are Claudia and Jerry." And I realized he had a book that he dedicated to them. I wish I would have had him sign that one, to Jerry and Claudia, from Frederick Buechner. And then people would see it was dedicated to Jerry and Claudia, and I could play the pretense that, he signed it to me, he dedicated a book to me. He didn't, but anyway. Yes?
When you were talking about processing our grief,
Say it again?
when you were talking about processing our grief in the car.
Yeah.
What does it look like to process our grief and revisit it multiple times without dwelling in it in like an unhealthy or negative way?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first off, as we revisit it, I think we need to revisit it as long as it's still percolating inside. And it may take time. To forgive, I think, requires grieving as well as forgiving. The grieving shows that the emotion of it is still operational at some level. And if I don't press out the pus of the emotion of abuse and hurt in a fallen world, then it's still going to reside with me. So I think that's what it looks like. And I think that you begin to discover when it doesn't hold you anymore that you've done a pretty good job. You know, and this might not be quite the same. I have two people who really hurt me badly in the past, and I've never met a non-broken person. We need to be mended and we need to be deployed. But I've met two people I thought were certifiably evil. And when I say that, I don't think they did these things unaware. If we're carrying on the weight of past sins, we may be unaware that we're doing that. But these two guys were intentional. They knew what they were doing, and they were out not just to hurt me, it was characteristic of their life. And so in those situations, I realized after I got out of their influence at all, so that they couldn't hurt me anymore, but I'm still living in the pain of it, that I need to be angry. It says in Ephesians 4, be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. Do not give the devil an opportunity. I think the devil traffics in our bitterness, gains a foothold into our life, and we can inadvertently be his ambassadors hurting other people. So be angry, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger. He doesn't say don't be angry. We're humans. We have to process the pain. But the thing that was interesting to me is it also says pray for your enemies. So I started praying for these guys, and I started praying the imprecatory psalms, you know, how blessed are those who bash Babylonian babies' heads against the rocks. Did I tell you this already? Or, Lord, I pray Psalm 109, all my enemies' children will be orphans. You know, you read some of these psalms and you go, oh my heavens. Have you ever heard people say, well, I love the psalms, they're so comforting. I go, I don't know if you're reading the same ones I'm reading. They are emotionally truthful. They're talking to us about the human condition. So I started out praying for them the imprecatory psalms. And then in time, as I'm grieving and forgiving, having those long drives, and the times are becoming shorter and shorter where it holds me, my prayers went to, Lord, I pray for these two guys that nobody would be able to hurt them the way that they've hurt me. If it wasn't good for me to experience this, I don't want them to experience it either. And now I'm moving into more empathy. And I think that's more Christ-like than me holding a grudge against them. And now, all these years later, it took time, I pray for their welfare and for their good. I want them to know the grace of God and the love of God that could set us free. Does that make sense then? Yeah. Anything else? I don't know how much time we have, Jen. You're the keeper of the clock.
Yeah, you could do it.
Beg your pardon?
You could do it and talk as long as you want.
Does anybody have another question? Yes, sir.
This is more related to like last night.
Beg your pardon?
This is more related to last night's like evangelism.
Yeah.
And so my question is, especially in context, us being on a mountain, I don't live but 5 hours from here. Like when I go down the hill and I get the opportunity to evangelize.
Yeah.
Or if I'm on vacation or like I'm out. What does follow-up look like? And then if we have a chance to follow up in the moment with like, who is Jesus? What has he done for you? Do you believe in this? Do you want to believe in this? Teach about the good soil. What is our, like, go do this? Like, what is our like call to action? What do you bring to attention as far as?
Well, I don't know. Last night I tried to make clear on follow-up. I usually take the person to John 6:47 right off and let them know what the scriptures say they have eternal life. But then I take them to John 17:3 and say it's not just length of days or length of forever. It's a relationship with Christ, John 17:3. And this is eternal life, that they may know thee, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom thou hast sent. And then I take them to Matthew 13, the parable of the soils, and I show them which one do you want to be, and let them make the decision that they want to be this the good soil, not the weedy one. And now because they've made that decision, I say, I want to do that too. How about if we start meeting together so that we could see how we could grow to be fruitful people? And isn't it interesting, the fruitful thing is not unlike the Ephesians 4:12. Equip the saints for work of ministry, and it's to help them ultimately to be fruitful, to mend and deploy into fruitful activity. Jesus says, abide in me, John 15, and do what? Remember? Abide in me and bear fruit. The mark of a fruitful person, the mark of a mature Christian is they're starting to bear fruit. I don't think we do it in every area, but we're incrementally growing to do it in more and more areas. And I think that's really important. You go to Jude and 2 Peter, and it talks about the apostates who creep into the church. It says in John, Jesus says, you have heard that Antichrist is coming. Or it's in 1 John. You have heard that Antichrist is coming. I tell you, many Antichrists have already come. And he says, they went out from us. Who's the us? The church. These guys Satan's a wily guy. He's trying to really destroy the church. When somebody says, I'm mad at the church, I don't want anything to do with Christ. Were they mad at a true Christian, or were they mad at a person who was in the church who was doing bad things? They went out from us. For if they would have been of us, they would have remained with us, but they went out in order it might be manifest. Not all are truly of us. So Jude and 2 Peter talks about the apostates who creep into the church. You know what the characteristic of them is? Huh? Autumn trees without fruit. They have all the trappings. It's a flourishing tree with no fruit. They're hidden reefs. People get crashed on them. They're clouds without rain. Clouds without rain. In an agrarian society where they didn't have irrigation, to have rainless clouds is destruction to the society. How then do you keep the apostates from getting into positions of leadership in the church? Huh? I think that's it. You've got these qualities for leadership, they should be above reproach. They should be people who can manage their own household well, and all this other stuff. But I don't think that's an exhaustive list of leadership qualities. If maturity in the Christian life is that we're a fruit bearer, then we should say to the person who wants to be on the board at the church, well, you might be a perfect fit, but we need to see fruit first. And if you don't know how to do it, we'll take you out and show you. But if they don't have fruit, they shouldn't be serving in leadership at the church. All the decisions they're going to be making are going to be devoid of what the central mission of the church is, to make disciples. So these become important things, I think, and follow-up is really important in that process. Is that helpful?
Yeah, it is. So if I'm going to follow up with somebody that's a long distance, right? Like I meet somebody down in Fresno.
Yeah.
Like we're going down to LA this weekend.
Yeah.
If I meet somebody there.
You lead them to Christ.
Call them.
Yeah, you could call them. You could. Sometimes what I've done is when I've led a person to Christ and we're on a plane or something, I try and find out where they live. I mean, you can get in touch with people from churches in those places. And you could say, can I put you in touch with this church? You might want to look at this one. Whether they do it or not is in some ways up to them. There's distance. But I believe that if I'm involved in that process, I'm going to do the best I can, and I'm going to trust that God's going to also be working in that process. And I'll give you two stories. When I was a new Christian, I got a job in the summer. I had been a Christian about 9 months. I got a job in the summer. I had to pay my own way through college. I had to work hard. I got a job in construction. And I was a jackhammerer, and we were putting in replacement gas pipes throughout LA. And I don't think I ever worked so hard in my life. Before I got that job, I met a guy on my campus who was the electrician. And he went to my church, so it was almost like seeing an oasis when I'd see him. But he was always angry. He was angry at the jerks that he had to work with, and how he would try and talk to them about Jesus, but they were jerks and all that stuff. And I thought, man, that's not a way probably to win somebody. And one time, he got so mad at one of them, he cold-coxed them, and he got fired. I go, okay, if you witness and people make fun of you, that's probably not the way to act. So I got my job with this construction crew, and these guys are saying, you're in college, you're working here for the summer, you're in college. That's a great life, man. You can drink all you want, you could shack up with as many women as you want, you could do all this stuff. And I said, I don't do that stuff. Why not? Well, I'm a Christian, and I'm choosing to do something different. As soon as they heard I was a Christian, they were on me like flies to stink. For 2 straight weeks, they made fun of me. The problem is some of the stuff they said was funny. So rather than getting mad, I would laugh, I'd laugh. And I'd think, I'm not going to do what that guy did back at the college, the electrician guy. And I worked like a dog. And I was going to not let one person on that crew work harder than me. And they're making fun of me, and I'm not taking it. I'm not, biting that hook. And I'm working hard. And when they made fun of me, I would laugh at their jokes at my expense. Within 2 weeks, I was one of their brothers. And I worked hard. And once in a while, I'd have time to share when we did our lunch break and stuff like that. At the end of the time, I have to get ready to go back to college for football. And I said to them, what would I have to do to share Jesus with you for my last day here? They said, Jerry, you bring us a case of beer. You could talk to us about Jesus as long as you want. I was too young to buy the beer. I didn't know if that was the right thing to do, but I brought a case of beer. They each put 1 beer in the cooler on the truck, divided up the rest in their cars, and took it home. At the end of the day, they reached into the cooler, pulled out a beer, popped the top, laid out on the grass, and said, you can talk to us about Jesus as long as you want. It's amazing. I don't know what happened to them. I went back to work there the next year. I paid my union dues all year. I went back to work there the next year. The company had folded. So those guys all went to different companies, and I couldn't get on anywhere else because there was a glut of workers at all those other companies. I didn't know what I was going to do for work. I get a phone call from the YMCA. I'd always been involved with the Y. And they said, we had a guy who was going to direct our day camp for us this year, and he just told us he wasn't coming. Would you be willing to direct our day camp? It was like a godsend. I had a job. I said, yeah. So the day camp, they would go to places, Disneyland, Knott's Berry Farm, something like that, maybe the beach or something. And we had to plan every day what we were going to do. Went for a week, and then they'd start a new session the next week. In the afternoon, they had story time. They also wanted me to direct their residential camp up in the mountains. And they would have campfire every night. And the last night, they would have the big last campfire and stuff. And I told the directors at that YMCA, I love these story times, but I don't want to tell just any story. I want to tell Bible stories. Kids love Daniel and the Lion's Den. They love Queen Esther. They love David and Goliath. I want to tell Bible stories. And the last day, I want to tell the gospel story. And they said, okay, but you can't follow anybody up. At that point in my life, I wouldn't have known how to follow anybody up. But I was happy for the opportunity. And we saw about 560 kids trust Christ that summer. What happened to them? I used to agonize. I would pray, Lord, I did what I could do. Please, Father, watch out for those kids. Please, Lord, nurture them. So several years later, I was a youth pastor in the suburbs of LA. The YMCA was in the inner city where I had grown up. And I was in the suburbs of LA at a church. We had a robust youth group. It was a growing big youth group. And this kid came one day to the youth group. His name was Mike. I said, you look new to me. I don't think I've ever seen you before. He says, no, I am new. I met some Christian kids on campus. We just moved to the area, our family. And I wanted to find a church, and they said, come to our church. And so I'm here. I said, what's your name? Mike. I said, Mike, are you a Christian? He said, actually, I am. I said, how'd you become a Christian? He said, I was at a YMCA camp up in the mountains. And the last night of the camp, the director got up there and shared the gospel. We were supposed to go the next day for family vacation, so my dad came up and he spent the night that night. We left at dark 30 before the buses went back, and he and I both trusted Christ. We went on vacation. We came back and started going to church. Wasn't long after that before my mom and my 2 sisters came to Christ. We just moved to the suburbs. We're looking for a church. I said, Mike, what was the name of that camp? He said, it was Little Green Valley YMCA camp, not far from where Hume SoCal is. So Little Green Valley YMCA camp. I said, what was the YMCA you went up with? He said, it was the Southeast YMCA in Huntington Park, California. I said, Mike, I was the director of that camp. I started weeping. I can still weep now. Because it told me God was watching out for them. I was doing the best I knew how. And God wasn't going to abandon those kids. So I got more stories, but we don't need to have another one.